Good morning on Monday, the 10th week of Ordinary Time. We start a new cycle in our first reading for our daily readings. We're going to be looking at really the second half of First Kings. We'll be with that for about 3 weeks, and then we'll move on to more prophets. But the first half of this section is going to be dealing with the prophet Elijah, and then the second half will be about the fall of the two kingdoms. And then from there, we'll get into about 3 or 4 weeks of prophets. So let's get into it. So before we get into the first reading, let's get caught up in the story here in First Kings. So the first 16 chapters of First Kings kind of go something along lines like this. It begins with really kind of the end of David's life. Okay, so the majority of David's stories in 1 Samuel and all of 2 Samuel. The beginning of 1 Kings, David is old. He's ready to die to meet the Lord. Kind of a messy situation, but his son Solomon eventually does take over. Solomon kind of is the great builder and the great wise man. Okay, and of course the greatest thing that he completes is that of the temple, which was started during David's time and completed and dedicated during Solomon's time. It's when then we see the glory of the Lord coming down onto the temple. Okay, a very significant part of the history of Israel and also in the New Testament. But God's glory right now is in the temple. Israel, the nation, the unified kingdom is at its highest point. Politically, spiritually, everything's there. The temple's there now. God's glory's dwelling in it. They're very strong in terms of economics and has a world power. But we hear little tidbits, little hints in the life of Solomon that things aren't as great as they seem. The one passage I have in mind is they tell us that Solomon had thousands of wives. A lot of them were pagan wives with lots of gold and lots of chariots. And these three things were actually forbidden by Moses in the book of Deuteronomy before they entered into the promised land. So the writer's kind of given us hints that, it looks good on the outside, but inside there's going to be some problems, which eventually then leads into the next part of First Kings, where now the kingdom is split. Jeroboam, leading the northern tribes, doesn't want to be builders for the southern kingdom anymore. Okay, so you have this kind of sense of the Israelites feeling and believing that they're kind of going back into slavery. They're doing all this heavy lifting, and a lot of their money and resources are going down into the southern kingdom to maintain the temple and other buildings and infrastructures. And so they revolt. And kind of form their own nation, and now this unified kingdom is divided into two. But what's even worse than even the break-in of the unification is the fact that Jeroboam and the northern kingdom started their own cultic system. They built shrines. They created their own priesthood. They separated themselves from the cultic system that God gave to Moses, okay, that was centered around the temple. And so that was problematic because in this new cultic system, they also were bringing in, again, pagan and outside elements. Now, Jeroboam is gone. And now we have Ahab, which is where we pick up today quickly in the first reading, 1 Kings chapter 17. Ahab is described as the worst king, even worse than all the fathers that came before him. Like that's how Ahab is described. He marries Jezebel, which we'll hear about her later on. In these readings, very problematic, just a very morally flawed figure. And again, the northern kingdom now, their heart has moved away from the Lord. They've followed pagan gods, created their own cultic system. And so Elijah comes into the picture now in chapter 17. And what's the first thing that he does? Elijah, the great prophet, who's also a great miracle worker, which is very different than most of the prophets in the Old Testament. Elijah is very much like Moses. Okay, the two go side by side. In fact, on August 6th, the Feast of the Transfiguration, we'll see the two of them make an appearance in the New Testament. But the first thing he's asked by the Lord is to create a drought. Okay, no rain for 3 years. And a lot of times spiritually that has to happen to us, where when we go off the rails, so to speak, and we're just not devoted to the ways of the Lord. Sometimes we have to lose things and lose the things that we hold on to, in order then to in the act of losing it, seeking out the help of the Lord. Okay, and that's what's going on here. God's trying to bring the northern kingdom back to him, sends this great prophet Elijah, and now he's going to make things difficult for them to know that he is the source and provider of everything in their lives. Okay, and so we'll pick up again how this story progresses, and we'll see what happens with Elijah and with the nation of Israel, especially the northern kingdom. May God bless you.